What's up, basketball coaches, players, and fans? Welcome to the Pass First podcast, where we share our knowledge of the game of basketball. My name is Alex Engel, and I'm here with my partner, Augie Johnston. We hope you're able to take something away from this podcast that'll help you on your basketball journey. Without further ado, let's get into today's episode. All right, so today we're going to cover a couple different topics. We're going to talk about communication skills as a coach, the skills that you need to help you communicate with your players, with your staff, with the parents, even with the referees. So all those communication skills. And we're also going to talk about the different coaching styles and how those coaching styles affect players, what's the best coaching style, and just talk a little bit more into the maybe basketball psychology and communication part of basketball. So let's get right into it. We're going to start. Augie, I'll toss it over to you. When we're talking about communication styles, what's your kind of style and what do you think as far as head coaching communication when it comes to your players and your team and all that? How do you work with that?
So as far as communication goes and stuff, I think that as far as coaching goes, the times have kind of changed a little bit from back in the day where it seems like from what I've seen, most coaches were pretty hard on their players and their communication. They didn't put too much thought into their communication. And so for me personally, I try to keep that stuff in mind. I definitely try to keep like a positive atmosphere in my games, in my practices, and really just anything related to basketball because I do coach high school basketball. So, you have a wide variety of commitment level from the players and the parents and everybody involved, whether you have the kid that's just doing it for fun and the other kids that have, goals to play in college. But as far as communicating with players, I do think that I'm more on the side of you got to know the differences in between each players. What can they take? Can you bark at a certain player and that gets him going and then that gets him playing better? Or does that destroy that player and kind of destroy their confidence and, make them put their head down? And so I try to differentiate a little bit with my communication with my players, but also the situation that you're in, I think depends on how you need to be communicating with them. So, how you talk to a player in practice might be a little bit different than how you talk to them in the actual game, right? The live game. So I'm normally a little bit harder on my players in practice as far as, if they make a mistake, I'm trying to, let them know like, hey, this, we can't be doing this. When in the games, you kind of got to pick your battles, I feel like, and kind of choose what you want to say because your communication with them is so limited, right? You have a timeout, you got 30 seconds, you got one thing you can say, and you got to make sure that you tread kind of lightly there. But yeah, so like I said, in practice, as a player, one thing I always do remember as a player is like, no matter what the coach says to you, you take it kind of to heart. It hurts. Mm-hmm. Right. So like you might be doing like this is just a kind of a dumb example, but let's say you're doing a layup drill and you shoot a right-handed layup on the left side and the coach is like, hey, use your left. That you're just like, oh man, like, I had a bad angle, like that's how players think. Like they want to say something back. They want to have an excuse. And so with that said, like in practice, I am more hard on the players, but I do recognize that that exists. And so as far as my communication in practice, I think in communication in general, in life, you have to kind of pick your battle. If you want to correct them on every single thing in practice, then first of all, your practices are going to be really boring. You're going to be stopping a lot. But also your players are just going to get super frustrated. So I think you got to make sure that whatever you are communicating, that it's actually going to deliver value to your team and help your team play better, So what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with, I think one of the main things you said was that you have to know the personnel, you got to get to know your players and know what they can and can't handle. I'm kind of in the same boat as you. Like I try and be more on the positive side. I haven't, my experiences as a player, I never had coaches that were like the crazy screamer, like cussing you out, and I know some people have, quite a few players that I know have. I was fortunate never to have someone like that, but I did have some coaches that were maybe a little more negative and they were positive. And there were times I know as a player where like my confidence dropped because I was communicated to a certain way, and it's kind of like you said, if you're constantly getting ragged on for every little mistake, like eventually you kind of start tuning people out. Um, or, you're like, oh, well, why, players will be like, why aren't you picking on so-and-so, right? Why aren't you
Mhm.
calling the other guard out, or why aren't you calling the other post out? And even though like realistically, maybe you're the one that's making all the mistakes and the other one's not, so there's a lot of like little things that go into that. But I definitely try and keep it more positive. But I also want to make sure that there's a line where they know, like, okay, you still have expectations, you know what I mean? And you need to meet those expectations. And when you don't, I may tell you that in a like kind of friendly-ish way or a more positive way. But at a certain point, when you keep making the same mistake over and over and over again, like that friendliness is going to wear off. It's going to be like, hey, like next time, make sure you do this. Okay. Hey, next time, make sure you do this. If I said that to you like 4 times, at some point I'm like, dude, get it together. You know what I mean? Like, what are you
Mhm.
doing? Like, I just said that to you. Or, for in my case, right now I'm coaching girls. So it's even different, how they communicate compared to how previously college men communicate. Like different groups can handle different types of criticism or different types of communication from a head coach. So I agree that you kind of have to know your team. If you don't build any relationship with your team, you don't know them, then they're not going to respect what you're saying as well. Like the more you can get to know them, the more they're going to listen, and the less likely they are to be like, oh, like you just didn't see that I didn't have a good angle, or he didn't see, you know what I mean? They're going to be like, all right, coach,
Mhm.
yeah, I got you. And I could give you an example where um, this past season, I had one of my players who struggled with using her left hand, right, for layups. And right from the very beginning, I was like, hey, we got to fix that. And I was like, I'm not going to scream at you. Like, I'm not going to yell at you. I was like, I want you to try it. I know you're not comfortable with it. And I know you feel like, oh, I'm going to miss and coach can get mad. I'm like, I'm not going to get mad at you. Just do it every practice, work on it. And like 2-3 months in, she'd been doing it every day. All of a sudden she starts making them. By the end of the season, she's making them, you know what I mean? Like very regularly. And she was like, wow, like it was just all my other coaches would scream and yell at me when I missed my left hand layup. So I got afraid to use it. Um,
Yeah.
so there's a way to like go about it to promote them without tearing them down, I think.
Yeah, and I think kind of what you just said is all about like creating that environment, right? That like growth mindset environment. I mean, I know like with our AAU program, the youth kids, the younger ones that I deal with, like we definitely have created that environment to where like if you shoot with your left hand and you miss, like that's okay. You're still getting like the good job, way to use your left.
Mhm.
And and what I've noticed is like, yeah, kids aren't afraid to shoot a left-handed layup and miss in practice. And even like when we're scrimmaging, I'm like, whoa, he actually just tried to shoot a left-handed layup to win the game. He missed, but
Yeah.
at least he's trusting it, and he
Right.
understands that no one's going to get mad at him for doing that. So yeah, and another thing you said too is about like just like positive reinforcement, right? So I noticed last season in a particular practice, we have 2 players on the team that were kind of equal in my mind and kind of fighting for playing time all the time and against each other. And just using positive reinforcement was helping. Using positive reinforcement on one player was actually helping the other player because they would see that and then they're like always trying to compete against with each other, and I'd be like, oh,
Mhm.
great move, great way to see that, da, da, da. And then the other player would kind of take notice of that, and then he would try to like duplicate that success. And I was
Mhm.
like, wow, okay, so I don't need to bark at him to not do that. I'd rather just tell him good job for doing something, what I'd like, and then it just kind of spreads. So I mean, most
Yeah.
coaches know that the positive reinforcement is kind of the best strategy in communicating with players. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's like we both kind of said there, you just have to find that balance, and you can't let it be like, I don't ever tell them when they're wrong, because I think that there's a tipping
Yeah.
point the other way where you said like in the past, coaches were less worried about, um, communicating with the players and getting to know them. And now I think, it's tipped more towards the middle, which I think is good. But I've also seen coaches go the other direction where it's like, hey, like we're just going to let everything go, and we don't want to bring anyone down, and everything's going to be positive all the time. And it's like, there's a certain point where when you're messing up, you got to be told you're messing up. Like that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's just how you go about doing it. So I think there's the middle ground with that, like with everything. Um, but
Yeah. And I think as far as like one thing that we do too with our program is that in the lower levels, we try to teach them how to take feedback from coaches, right? With the
mhm,
yes, coach, just say yes, coach,
mhm,
and so, as they get into high school or college or something, they're able to like for a coach to say, hey, you did the wrong thing there. And in their mind, even if they know for a fact they did the right thing and the coach just missaw it, that they're able to actually say, okay, coach, I got it.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's so valuable because it's hard to do that, like human nature wise, right? If you tell me,
Right.
hey, raise your left hand, and I raise my left hand, you say, hey, that's your right hand. No, raise the other hand. I'm like,
Yeah.
no, but
Right.
to have a good practice and to be a coachable player, you need to be able to like just say, okay, yeah. And
Yeah.
also another thing I wanted to add about communicating with players, and like I mentioned, is in the games, right? It's different. So in the games, I mean, I made this mistake in the past season as well, where I've gotten on a player in a timeout, and I literally saw like tears boil up in his eyes, and I'm just like, all right, he's probably checked out for the rest of the game. Unfortunately, that was probably a mistake. I probably should have just, mentioned it in a different way or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And but also too at the same time, I've gone into halftime down and gotten on my guys and pick it up. You guys are playing down to the competition, blah blah blah, and that's worked too. So
Mm-hmm.
I think there is a time and a place for kind of the hard coaching as well.
And I think when you're going back to what you were saying about like when you want a player to say yes, coach, I think I agree. Like in the moment, you kind of got to listen. But I think what I try and tell my players is, hey, like I may make mistakes, and it's not that you can't come to me and say, ask me why, or maybe say, hey, coach, this is what you saw, but this is what happened. What I saw, you know what I mean? Then we could talk. But like, there's a way to go about that. If I'm like, hey, you did this, next time you need to do that, then it's hard if players are just talking back to you like, no, I didn't do that. You know what I mean? Or whatever, I'm not listening to you. But if they come to you afterwards, like, hey, coach, this is what actually happened, or maybe, this is what I saw. And then I'm like, oh, okay, I missed, that was my mistake, my bad. And in the future I can fix that. But that's a way better way to communicate than to have like barking at each other back and forth, because it
Definitely.
kind of creates dissension when players do that stuff, I think. So you want to communicate with them. Yeah, sure. I'm very open to, I tell my players all the time, like, I'm not perfect. I'm going to make a mistake here or there. So if you see something that I don't see, please, like, let's talk about it. But there's a way to come talk to me about it. Um,
Yeah, I agree with that. The one thing I tell my players too is, hey, you're going to be coached by a lot of different coaches in your lifetime. They're going to tell you a lot of different things. Some things will contradict each other, and your only job really is to take all these little pieces of sand, try them out, see how they apply to you. If they work for you, then add that to your game. If it
mhm.
doesn't work for you, if whatever that coach is telling you to do, if that doesn't work for you, then just say okay. Take it with the terminology, take it with a grain of salt, I think is,
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
and and try it, and if it works, then great. If not, then you can just move on to the next.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. Okay. So moving on from the players, now we're going to move into in the games. What about communication with the refs? How do you go about doing that? Because I know there are a lot of coaches that deal with that in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, and I think that I don't know the right answer on this, but here's kind of what I've seen maybe it depends on who's reffing, but I've seen some coaches go really hard on the refs. Okay, I'm not one of them, but they go really hard on the refs, and it works, right? They're able to literally manipulate the refs. Me personally, I try to like be more smooth about it, and try to get a ref to sit, like, to run by me and be like, okay, I missed that one.
Hmm.
That I feel like doing that like helps you build a little bit of like that puts a little money in your bank, for
Right.
like the next call. But yeah, I mean, I'm big on at timeouts, or not at timeouts, but at halftime or end of quarters, having my assistant run the timeout real quick, and then chat with the ref real quick and be like, what did you see on this? What was the call? Was he not straight up? More asking questions than actually telling them. That's what I do.
Yeah. I definitely am more of a question asker myself. If a call happens, I might say, hey, like, Frank, what happened? What'd she do? Did she have her hand straight up? You know what I mean? Or would she use her body? Like, what happened? And they'll tell me. And I try to do that. I try. But at the same time, I definitely had plenty of moments where I see a call and I know it's a really, really bad call. And I don't, scream and yell at the refs, but I might be like, what was that? Like, what was going on there? I'm not saying that's the right or wrong thing to do, but I've definitely gotten on the refs sometimes. But I try and balance it so that, you don't want to be that coach that, like, every time a ref comes to the game, like, oh man, I got Coach Engel today. Like, I don't want to, I don't want to ref this game. He's going to be
Yeah.
screaming and yelling the whole time. And there are coaches like that, and
Oh
the thing
yeah.
is, people forget like refs are human beings. So, we can sit here and say whatever we want as far as like, oh, well, they're going to not be biased. They're not going to be biased. But at the end of the day, like there is a bias, it's just natural the way humans work. So if you're known for being that screamer and yeller, you're probably going to not get as many normally. You're not going to get as many favorable calls. I also think it kind of depends on like your resume and experience as a coach. If you're like a 20-year coach that's like a legend in the area and everybody knows you, you could probably push the envelope a little bit more. If you're some like new up and comer that hasn't done anything yet and you're just really loud and obnoxious, like I feel like a lot of refs are just going to tune you out, or be more likely to tee you up. So I do think that plays a part as well.
Yeah, and I think, whether, you should be hard on a ref because it's going to get you calls, or you should, try to get in their ear with questions and get on their side to get you calls. Like, you got to kind of think of the big picture as far as like, what are you teaching your players, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I know for a fact, coaches that yell more at the refs have players that yell more at the refs.
That's true.
Yeah, and I've seen that a lot. So, and I don't want my players yelling at the refs at all.
No.
We have pretty I don't know, I want to say strict rules, but we like have some guidelines that at our high school that we really live by, and one of them just being like a class act at all times. So I do my best to not get on the refs, but I mean, dude, it's frustrating at times when you say, what'd you see there? He's like, oh, his arms came down, like if they call a foul on us or something, when for a fact he was just straight up.
Right. Yeah.
But like you said, like they're humans, right? They're going to make mistakes, just like as coaches, we make mistakes all the time, and players as well. But it is nice when you have a ref that is a good ref, right? That makes the right calls. Because I can live with that when we play a game and we lose, and I realize like, hey, I wasn't getting on the refs at all that game. It's probably because they were doing a good job. So it's not like, I really try to pick my battles with that as well. Like if it's a bad call and I know he's wrong, like I want to let him know, like, hey, I think you missed that one, but you can't nitpick every little thing.
Yeah, and reffing, and I've done not a lot, but a little bit of not like official reffing, but like summer league reffing and stuff. Like it's not easy.
Dude.
You know what I mean? Like it is not easy. So for anyone out there watching this, if you think it's like, oh, this is they're refs, they suck, they're not good. Like I would love for you to get out there and put some stripes on and do that, because you have parents constantly yelling at you, you got coaches constantly yelling at you. Anytime you make a mistake, you know what I mean? Like it's not easy to do. So I have respect for the people that ref the games. I mean, whether a lot of the refs in this area, we know, I mean, they've refs in this area for a long time, so we know them. And it's like, you want to win, but at the same time, you have to understand that they're trying to do their best. And I think that you got to just kind of work in between. It's a fine line you're walking at all times, So I think that's, we kind of hit the nail on the head with that one. But.
Yeah.
All right. So now talking back to more towards our own team, what about communicating with your parents? Now, this obviously will depend on the level you're at. If you're a college coach, you probably don't have to deal a whole lot with parents. At least, like I said, in my experience, I didn't deal with parents a whole lot when I was coaching at the college level. High school, though, completely different story. You've got parents all the time, or if you're an AAU coach, completely different story, around parents all the time. So what's your kind of philosophy on that?
Just to really hear them out. I think a lot of times they just want to be heard. Like, let's say a parent wants their kid to get more playing time. They just want to be heard, right? They're not in practice every day. They're not in the game. So they are kind of trusting you so much with their kid, and they don't know like where he lies on the totem pole and stuff. They don't see, like I said, every practice or every game. And so I just try to hear them out and then just be honest with them. Like just, don't try not to sugarcoat anything, but at the same time, you do have to sugarcoat a little bit, right? I can't be like, oh, your son, he's the worst player on the team. That's why he's not playing. He's the worst player on the team. Like I would say, like, hey, he's been working really hard, but he's getting better. But at this point, he's competing against this player, and this player for playing time. And, you're welcome to come watch practice. You've probably seen the games. You can compare their stats. But stats are a huge one too. I use stats a lot when talking with parents because, there's not as much bias there. There's, you can say, hey, he's shooting, 14% from the three, 16% from the field, is averaging, 2 turnovers per, 5 minutes of playing time. So, that's why he's not playing a lot. But But I do, like in my parent meeting and stuff, I do like give out my phone number and leave that door open to talk to parents. But yeah.
So I do Some a little bit similar, but a little different. So when my parent meetings, what I've said is, here's my phone number, here's my email. You can communicate with me at any time about anything. Well, actually, I'll rescind that. I don't say anytime. I do not right before a game, not right after a game.
Yeah.
So, that's the one time I say I don't want to, communicate right before when I'm prepping for the game, right after where emotions are high. Any other time other than that, though, you can communicate with me. However, the one thing I will not talk with you about is playing time with your kids. And I tell my parents that from the beginning. As anything else we can talk about, playing time, that's my decision. That's why they hired me as a coach. That's why I hired assistant coaches to help me with that. If your kid wants to know why they're not playing, they can always ask me, and I will always communicate with them, and I will tell them, but I will be honest with them. And, again, I'm not going to rip them, right? But I might, it's kind of the same thing. Like, hey, she's playing better than you. She's averaging this, this, and this. She does what I'm asking her to do, and you're not doing those things. So that's why. I am all for a parent saying, hey, my daughter's not playing a whole lot. What can I do? What can we do to help her get better? I'm all for that.
Yeah.
I'll gladly tell you what she needs to work on and what she needs to improve on. And that's kind of a way to skirt the playing time conversation, I guess, for parents, because then they're still hearing what they want to hear. But I just don't think personally as a coach, our job is to evaluate these players, and the only evaluation that matters at the end of the day is your head coach's evaluation. And that's something that I remember, coaches that I've coached for and played for, they've said, look, it doesn't matter what everyone else's opinions are. All that matters is my opinion, because I'm the one that's going to be playing you. So, if a player wants to talk to me, and at this point, in high school, I personally feel especially at the varsity level, you're old enough that you can come talk to me and communicate with me.
Yeah.
The same way that if you're sick or if your emergency happens and you can't make it to practice, you know what I mean? You need to communicate with me. I don't think your parent should be, when you're 17 or 18 and calling me being like, hey, Johnny can't make it to practice today. To me, it's you need to communicate with me and tell me that. Because I think it also develops you as an individual to be self-responsible.
Yeah, for sure.
So, that's kind of my rules as far as that goes. And I didn't really have any problems with that. I might've had one parent that tried to talk to me about playing time, and it was very minimal. And other than that, I didn't have any major complaints with this last season. Everyone seemed to respect that, but it's because I laid that down right away. I said, here's the rules, either you're with it and you're in, or you're not. And so I think if you wait or you're just kind of wishy-washy on it, then you're going to have more trouble with that type of stuff.
Yeah, definitely. I think for me, what I've found is that, I've opened the door for players to ask me about playing time and stuff, but it's never very productive. They're always like, what can I do to get more playing time? And you're like, okay, well, hey, you're not boxing out, every single time. Why don't you start boxing out every single time and grab more rebounds or whatever? Mm-hmm. But I've never seen that actually translate to the player going and, trying to box out more, get more rebounds and that kind of stuff. And so I think that's good to have that communication with the players, but my question is what can we do besides that to actually help them get that playing time? Because I'm trying to think of my past experiences, players like that. Have I had any players say, hey, what can I do to get more playing time? And I say that, and then they go and do it, and they actually go and get more playing time.
Right.
I don't know if it's because coaches are kind of got their mind made up, or it's just probably, honestly, it's because you're not playing over somebody because that player's better than you,
Yeah. I mean, I think for most of the time, unless you have two players that are really close, it's here and here, and this player's like, hey, what can I do to get better? And they make that little adjustment and they jump them. Most of the time it's one player's here, one player's here.
Yeah.
And okay, so now you started rebounding sick. You got up to here. You're still not as good. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I hate to say it like that. I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but it's just a fact. Usually there is a gap. If the players are close in ability and they make that improvement, then yeah, it can change things. Or maybe they start rebounding more and they do get more time, but that extra time is only 2 minutes a game, 2 minutes more than what they were getting. Sometimes there's only so many minutes that are available to move up. So I think there's a lot of things that go on. There's probably some bias from the coaches already initially, but I think it's hard for players to be like, all right, coach wants me to rebound, and I'm just going to go out and grab 20 rebounds, and all of a sudden I'm going to be playing a lot more. Realistically, it's usually oh, they grabbed a couple more rebounds than before, but are they better than the kid that's averaging 20 and 10? No, they're not necessarily.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably the main reason for that, at least in my opinion.
Okay.
All right. And so now we did players, refs, parents. Okay. So last one here, communication with your staff. Okay. So, different teams have big staffs, small staffs, whatever it is. How do you go about communicating with yours?
Yeah, so I think communicating with my staff is obviously you got to be respectful and stuff to them, but I think the valuable communication comes like before practices and before season even starts, when just communicating roles and responsibilities, right? I mean, that's kind of key. Is you want to be able to delegate certain tasks to coaches, whether it's even basic stuff like setting up practice, making sure the balls are out, towels, whatever, over to like, game responsibilities where they're going to be, focusing on defense, watching the defense, or focusing on offense, watching the offense or whatever. But I like to take my assistants and give them like main responsibilities. Like, hey, your main responsibility is offensive rebounding and defensive rebounding. And when we're in practice, and guys, like you can only focus on so much. So when we're in practice and I'm trying to set something up, like a new concept or a new drill or a new play or something, like, and we're running this play live, like I want them looking at rebounding. We have a offensive rebounding system and a defensive rebounding system. So, if we shoot the ball and what we call it tagging up, if guys aren't tagging up and 4 to the glass, 1 back, then he needs to be the one that pays attention to that and calls them out on that.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as like day-to-day communication, I think it's just keep them in the loop. Okay. I've made this mistake before where like you're so focused on like getting the word out about something to your players and to your parents that I don't even send it to my assistant coaches,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a problem. So you got to make sure that you communicate with them on just day-to-day stuff.
Yeah. What about when it comes to like games? Assistant coaches input in games. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, so I kind of have I have 2 assistants. I have one of them that is kind of like the input guy. He like watches the game from more of like a strategic position. And so he might say, hey, you need, he'll tap me on the shoulder either during the game or at a timeout or halftime, be like, hey, you need to switch blank, and let someone else guard him, or something like that. And also halftime, right? So halftime happens, someone goes and checks the book. We head over to the little area. We do a little powwow. We do a meet. We talk about things. I write my notes down before we go into the locker room. That gives the players kind of a minute to just kind of unwind, get our thoughts together. We usually try to put together 3 bullet points at halftime, and then we go in there and do that. But yeah, that's basically how we communicate in the games.
Okay. I want to continue on the game part for myself first. For me, like when it comes to games, I've told my assistants, and I think I'll probably forever do this, is whether it's game, I guess, or practice, if you disagree with something that I say, or like you see something differently than me, I want you to tell me.
Yeah.
I cannot stand having like yes men, or yes women or whatever it is that's on my staff. Like, I don't want that. I don't want you to just be like, oh, he's the head coach, I want to agree with him because he might get upset. You know what I mean? Like, I don't agree with that. I want to hear different opinions if you see something different than me, because I may be wrong again, and you may be right. And there's a reason I have you on my staff. If I have you on my staff, it's because I trust you. You know what I mean? To be able to understand certain things or see certain things. So if I trust you and I trust your word, then I may take what you're saying and be like, yeah, that's a good idea. Let's change that up. Or yeah, that's a good idea. Let's try that drill in practice, But if I see what you're saying and I'm like, hey, appreciate it, but that's not the direction I want to go, or I disagree with you, then at the end of the day, like, you've got to be like, all right, coach, like, that's what we're going with. You know what I mean? Like, you can disagree with me, but you got to be able to go with whatever I say. Cause at the end of the day, like, the head coach has the final word. And it was the same way when I was an assistant. We would get into discussions, and sometimes they would get heated, but at the end of the day, when the head coach said, no, this is the way we're going, we're like, all right, coach, we got you. We're going with you, because you can't have dissension. You can't have one coach going this way, one coach going that way. It's going to spreads to the players. It doesn't unify the group, So that's my views on that. And then as far as like the day-to-day stuff, I actually have never like designated certain roles the way you have. I actually never really thought about it. I don't say I've never thought about it in that way, but I've just never applied it. I may steal that idea from you, but I think I just kind of given my coaches in general what their roles are, like, okay, a couple of my assistants also coach the JV and the freshmen. So their roles are obviously to run those teams and those programs. Like, I don't want to be involved every day with having to organize the freshmen and the JV. But I don't give them like, hey, you should do this, you should do that, or you should focus on this, you should focus on that. I've never gone that route. I've been more like, let's all watch and see what we notice. And, if you're an assistant, if you're the freshman coach who's my assistant, I don't care. If you see it and it's wrong, you need to tell them, you know what I mean? Like, speak up. A lot of times I'll have my coaches come to me like, hey, I noticed like this and this. And I'll be like, all right, tell them, like, get in there. Like, I trust you. You're my coach. I want you to speak up. Because if they're only hearing it from me, like if players are only hearing stuff from me, I feel like it gets monotonous. And if they hear it from different people, then maybe it's more likely to stick, I feel like. So.
Yeah, and I love my assistants because they're kind of polar opposites. I have one assistant that's very fiery and that will get on the kids, and then I have one that's probably less like that, maybe better communicator and stuff. But it's like a good balance that we have, and I think it's good to know that the fiery coach, he knows that he can do that he's got the green light to do that, like in practice, to stop it and get on somebody, and honestly it's effective. It's effective, and it takes the burden off me, who's constantly, coaching and giving feedback constantly to make a point, I guess, to emphasize something.
Yeah. And I think just at the end of the day, like, you have to show respect to your assistants the same way that you would to any other head coach or whatever. Like, you can't, if you look at them like, oh, they're beneath me, they're my assistants, like, you're not going to have a good basketball culture. People aren't going to want to work for you. Like, you need to look at them like they're just as valuable as you. And in some cases they do extra things that maybe you don't have to do, you know what I mean? So I think you have to make sure you're showing them that same respect, and it'll make things work better in the long run. So
yeah, totally agree.
All right, let's move on. So we got through all our communication skills. Now we're going to go to coaching styles, and I'm going to break this down a little bit with what some of the different coaching styles are. So for those of you that don't know at home, or haven't looked into this a whole lot, there's kind of three main coaching styles that are talked about. The first one is called authoritative, and these actually fall into parenting styles. They come from what are called Baumrinn's parenting styles. But the first one is called authoritative coaching. So that's kind of like, you're that strong, you're setting rules, you're setting guidelines, but you're flexible. Like, you're willing to listen to your players. You're trying to be positive with your players and work with them. But at the end of the day, you're holding them to a specific standard. So that's authoritative coaching. The next one is authoritarian. That is, the typical dictator, the drill sergeant coach. That's just my way or the highway. Get out of, if you don't like it, get out of here. And not necessarily super friendly or positive with their players, but just kind of wants to be like, follow whatever I say, and that's it. And then the last one is permissive, and that's the style that's avoiding confrontation. So if you see the coach that's like always wants to be buddy and friends with their players, and kind of treats them more like they're his friends or her friends, instead of that there's a distinction between coach and player, that's the permissive style. So avoiding confrontation, again, very positive, but not really holding them to standards or holding them to expectations. So those are the three different styles that fall into the coaching category. But I guess we're just kind of discuss, what do you think is most effective? And I feel like we're going to have the same opinions on this, but what do you think is most effective and why? And then we can talk about why the other two are not as effective. So I'll let you kind of start.
Well, I think it's kind of clear to say that the most effective is authoritative, which is strong but flexible. But we did, there are coaches that are very dictatorship-like, that get it done. I mean, look at Bobby Knight. I mean, probably one of the greatest coaches of all time, but very authoritarian, which is not what I am. And then as far as permissive goes, I think that I kind of tend to, like, my weakness would be that I would sway more towards permissive at times, when I need to be more in that strong but flexible mode. But I think a good point that I wanted to bring up is that, like, every team is different on how you need to coach them too, because I learned that last season, because the season before, we didn't really have too many guys that would goof off, or any, guys that were like jokesters or anything like that. And, I could be a little bit more permissive with them, and they would still get the job done. They were still focused. We can make sure we're having fun and everything was good, and it was fine. This past season, I had to be a little bit more authoritarian, which is more of a dictator, because if it was like the typical thing with kids, right? You give them an inch, they'll take a mile. And that was exactly how our practices went. And I can even remember after a certain, I think it was a game. We actually won the game, but there was a certain player on our team that was really frustrated, and
Mm-hmm.
he was like kind of like pissed off for the week after. And I was like, okay, we need to talk this out. Like, what's going on?
Mm-hmm.
And he was just like frustrated that the guys were like so goofing off so much and stuff. And I was like, okay, yeah, like I understand where you're coming from, and that's on me. I'll make sure that we kind of snap that or whatever. And it was just good insight for me to learn, like, you know, um, just like you got to coach differently on who you have and kind of what they're all about. And but like I said, all coaches, they want to be in that authoritative area where they are, strong but flexible. And I feel like I'm there too, because I'm definitely known to start barking at the kids and get on them and stuff too. But like I said, at the same time, like I do want to have a fun environment where like kids want to come and play basketball. And I think that showed in this last year when we had 16 guys on the team, when other programs at the school were struggling to even fill their roster. We got tons of guys, and next year's gonna be the same thing because they want to play for me because they know it's going to be fun. But at the same time, you sacrifice a little bit of maybe progress with that. But yeah, that's kind of my perspective.
Yeah, and I think I think the talking about like authoritative and authoritarian, the names are so close. Sometimes you're like, or I'm thinking in my head like, wait, which one is which? I'm mixing them up. But I definitely try and I think I fit and agree that like authoritative is definitely where I try to be. Um, I would say I would probably a little bit of the opposite, where sometimes I sway a little more into authoritarian, not way out there or anything, but I definitely at times get on the kids when they're not performing the way they should be. Um, but I agree to the extent of like you said, you want to make it enjoyable and fun for them, because there's nothing worse than being a player and being like, oh God, I got to go to practice today. Like
Yeah.
I really don't want to go to practice today, And we all know like the seasons are long, especially now you got preseason. It's not like you just show up for the 2 months of basketball and you go home and that's it. Like you got postseason, you got summer, you got preseason. Like you're working out 8, 9, 10 months out of the year. So if you're doing that and it's just a grind every day and you're just like, I don't want to be around this coach every day, like you're going to burn out. You know what I mean? You might quit, or you might just go play another sport, or you're just not going to do very well on the team. So
Yeah.
I think that you want to try and fit in that middle area. I think the main thing is you just have to hold people accountable. Like it's okay to be friendly and nice as long as you're still holding them to their accountability. And I think that comes to where you're talking about progress. Like if you don't hold them accountable, you're definitely going to lose, or at least stay where you're at. But if you are positive with them, but still holding them accountable, then they'll progress. They'll still continue to get better, I think. But like for me, I'll give you an example. This last season, I'm not much of a yeller or a screamer, but there are, handful of times where I got on my girls because they weren't performing. And I remember one time where one of my players, the ball like rolled out and it was like right in front of her, and it was like rolling out to half court in a drill, right? And she could have just picked it up and she kind of like slowly jogged after it. And this other girl on the other team at the time came from like the free throw line, dove past her, got on the floor, like just snatched the ball, got up, and like that was it. That was the play. It was a turnover, and it was just so obviously I'm describing it, but if you saw it, it was so infuriating as a coach to see
Yeah.
someone just like waddle after the ball. And I ripped her like hard, and I didn't yell at anyone else. I actually like congratulated the other girl. I was like, great hustle, and I ripped her. But they were so shocked at like how hard I ripped her that the whole team was like shocked for like the next 10, 15 minutes. They were all quiet and like silent, and they didn't, and I had to like stop practice and talk to them like, hey, like we're not done practicing. We're not like, don't freak out just because I got a little upset at her. Like this is why, but the rest of you, I'm not mad at you guys. And besides that, like, it's not a big deal. I'm over it, but that was just unacceptable and we got to move on. But they were so not used to that for me because they were so used to me being like more positive with my critiques
Yeah.
that it threw them off. They were like, whoa, what was this? Like, I've never seen coach do that before. So I just think that, I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I just think that's something where if you do go out of your normal character every once in a while, sometimes players like don't know how to react. They get kind of surprised by that. Um, but yeah, and as far as talking about, I don't know if you kind of went into like the negatives and positives, but with the permissive side, I just don't think you can't be like friends with your players. I'm not saying, I don't want to say that. You have to be a coach first. You can be
Yeah.
friends second. And I think that's the thing is we've come to the point where, back in the day it was more drill sergeant like, and now we're shifting more towards that middle or even permissive side. And you see coaches that they just want to be friends with their players, and it's like, that's not your job. Honestly, you're doing the kids a disservice because you're not teaching them anything. Um, if it's just fun, but you're going 1-20, like every day of practice, all we do is scrimmage, but you're 1-20, like you're doing a bad job as a coach.
Yeah, definitely.
And then we already talked about on the other side, if you're too hard on them, it makes it a grind. So,
yeah. And I think that you have to have a little bit of dictatorship in there too, because just for to help the kids in their future, right? You don't know what their coach is going to be like the next year. So if they've never like seen a coach that's gotten on them or had like super high expectations and high standards, like kind of like you said, like the girl didn't dive for the ball, like that you're expected to dive for the ball to get the ball, And I remember that happened to us in one game. There's a player on my team that didn't take a charge, and same thing. I ripped him. He was the only one back. He had a perfect chance to take a charge. He didn't even try to block it or anything. And it was the same thing. But from that point forward, that player was constantly trying to take charges, and everyone else too, right? It was kind of the same thing. Everyone's scared, and they say, "Oh, I'm glad that was him, not me. I better make sure that if I'm in that situation, that I take the charge too." But just going back to what I was saying, like, you got to, like we said with the youth kids, right? We got to teach them practice etiquette. We got to teach them how to be coachable. They need to understand that, yeah, there are going to be some coaches that have super high expectations, and if you don't do it right, they're going to get on you. And you got to be able to handle that. Yeah, I mean, the whole permissive side of it is like we said before, right? Maybe not permissive, but like, how do you talk to your players and how do you coach your players differently, right? I mean, some you need to be more, like I said, the ones that are goofing off in my practice all the time. Like I have to be, authoritarian with them. I have to be a stickler on everything. Otherwise, give them 1 inch, they'll take a mile. But yeah, I mean, I think that as you get up into the higher level, like college and stuff, you're going to see a lot more dictatorship stuff. Number one, because the job's on the line, right? These coaches have pressure. Like this is their livelihood. If they don't win, they could lose their job. And so that's kind of where I've seen like the more the craziness come out of people. But in the high school level, you just gotta be smart, right? You gotta be smart about how you coach these kids because they will quit, and you gotta be careful of that. And not that you need to like adjust anything as far as like, oh, I gotta make sure that I'm, not too hard on them, but like the whole like FUs and, using that kind of language and stuff. Like, I mean, not that I ever had a coach that said that to me, but I've had a coach say some crazy things to players before, calling them different things. And like, I just feel like nowadays that would not fly. Like you'd be fired instantly.
Definitely at like a high school level for sure.
Yeah.
I think, like you said, college coaches might be able to get away with a little more. But I think that's a good point. And I probably should have said that at the beginning, but that's a good point. Like with college coaches as well, like the players are there because they absolutely want to be there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like they're either, whether they're on scholarship or if they're a walk-on or whatever it is, they want to be there. So it's like, you have more leeway to be like, hey, either get in or get out, because there's plenty of other guys that'll take your spot, or girls, whatever side you're on. But high school, like you said, you get a mix, and you've got those, maybe part of your team really wants to be there every day. The other part, they want to be there, but it's because they enjoy it, just playing basketball, not because they want to play at the next level, Or you got some kids, maybe they're just there for the social aspect. Like it's a kind of a different game. But I still think if you set your expectations high and you're like, hey, these are my expectations. This is the start of the year. This is what we're going for. Either you're in with that or out, then I think generally the players will try to rise to that. And I don't think that makes you a dictator. I don't think setting high expectations makes you a dictator. I think that fits right into the authoritative part is, hey, I'm going to work with you. We're going to be positive, but these are my expectations. You need to meet them. And I know right now that, I don't know, are you watching The Last Dance? Have you watched that at all?
Yeah, not the latest one, but yeah.
Okay. So, in there, the Michael Jordan talks about, hey, you got to meet my expectations. Like you need to play the game at my level because I've already been through this and all that. And I think that's kind of what it is. Like, no, you're, if your level is here and this is what you think is good, well, here's what I think is good. And you need to meet me here. I'm not going to drop down to what you think is good, So that's kind of how I would try and look at things.
Yeah, it's funny you say that about The Last Dance, because I feel like Kobe took that from Jordan too, because I think that's one of the reasons Kobe and Shaq never got along, right? It's because Kobe's in the gym 24/7, his expectations are up here, and then Shaq is kind of like at a point in his career where he was kind of just coasting through, and there's obviously going to be some conflict there, and that's kind of the same thing like the player I told you about earlier. This last season, he was frustrated, right? We had to have a conversation because he had that Michael Jordan, that Kobe Bryant mentality, like, hey, no, we need to go. Like, we can't mess around. And so that was frustrating to him.
Yeah, no, I can understand that. So
okay.
Any other things you want to add on that?
No, I think that's about it.
All right. Well, that's all we've got for this week. Thanks for watching. If you like today's episode and are watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. If you're listening on iTunes, make sure to subscribe as well. We come out with a new episode once a week, and we hope to see you guys in the next one. Peace.
Bye.